Okay, so this quarter, we're at the second class for this quarter. This quarter is Lessons from the Life of Joseph. And it is comparable to what we did with Lessons from the Life of David, where we're not just moving through the text, a textual study to say what does Genesis 37 through 50 have to say. We're looking at Joseph's lives, and Mark and I are alternating, and we've picked out, just reading through, hey, here's a lesson, here's a lesson, here's a lesson. Let's talk about that. So, my main text for today is Genesis 38, and I really wanted to send something out to you to say, read Genesis 38, and this is how to prepare for this class, but I couldn't find the words to describe what we're going to do today. It's not really overly practical in nature, but there's something about Genesis 38 that, let me tell you this as we get started. I'm excited about it because there's something in Genesis 38 that we're going to do today that I have not seen before. And I always get excited about that when I get to learn something new and then share it with you. That's always fun. But often when I'm studying a text or preparing for a sermon or something, often, as I move through a text and I make my notes, there's something in the back of my head that says, there's something more. I know that it's there, but I don't know what it is. And that's what has happened with Genesis 38. So the class this morning for you is that thing that the government puts out sometimes. If you see something, say something. Because I think that there's something there. I don't know what it is. But it's very likely that somebody will be like, oh yeah, this is what's happening in this text. So let me introduce to you what we're going to be doing. Start at Genesis 37 and verse 36. Mark's last class was loved by the father, hated by the brothers. And the idea is Joseph's father loved him more than all of the others, and that led to he was chosen specifically by God, favorited by God, and it caused his other brothers to hate him. And so that points us to Jesus, loved by the Father, hated by the brothers, and it points us to us, loved by the Father, chosen by the Father, but hated by the brothers. And so that was our class. And we come to the end of that in verse 36. It says, meanwhile, we come to the end of the story. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So Joseph has been thrown in a pit, sold into slavery. He just arrived in Egypt. And then in chapter 38 and verse 1 it says, it happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. And then we've got an entire chapter with this story of Judah that, first of all, it's kind of uncomfortable in the first place. But you read through chapter 38, and then you come to 39 in verse 1, and it says, now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt. And it's like this. It's like, you would expect this kind of thing from me. You would expect me to be talking about a subject, and then I'm like, oh, hey, look over here. Let's talk about this. And then I'm like, oh, let's come back to... You expect that sort of thing from me. It feels a little bit strange in the Bible, though. And I think most of us, if you stop for just 1 second, most of us could say, there's probably a reason for it, though. We don't just see random one-offs in the Bible very often. There's a reason for this. And so this class, the question for this class is, why is Genesis 38 and the story of Judah here? Why is it plugged in here in between Joseph getting sold into slavery? He goes to Egypt. Here's the story of Judah. Now let's pick back up with Joseph in Egypt. So before I get started with my material, I thought we would just open it up and say, do you have any thoughts or ideas or anything that you might like to throw out? Or even if you just have questions about what we're looking at right now. Kevin, I call Kevin our Genesis 38 resident expert because once in Amarillo, Kyle Pope said, hey, I'm going to be out of town. Would you mind teaching class? And Kevin was like, oh, yeah, I'll do that. And he said, it's Genesis 38. And Kevin's like, great, Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I think to your point, right, in many other spots in kind of Bible stories, we're always able to kind of like point to a character, some kind of like learning and kind of like, what is the righteous living aspect I need to glean from that kind of reason for it being there? And I think on the surface, Genesis 38 is not that. But I think if we just gloss over it, I mean, in my previous reading at a Bible, like daily Bible reading, it's kind of like, all right, this is powerful, like, let's get this done. But I think as we look at the character flaws and the actually redemption of Judah further on, I think we see a very beautiful story, as well as the story of how God uses broken people to work out his plan. It may not be the most perfect and most smooth and polished version of what we would expect, but God often uses broken people, and that is hopeful for then us.
Yeah.
Because guess what? We were also all broken people.
Yeah, that's good. Any other initial thoughts? Mark and then John.
Just a comparison, contrast. You have Joseph and Judah, their brothers, so they, had the same father. They both grew up together. But this story of Judah, and then the next story we see of Joseph, it's one handles the situation this way. Judah, what we're going to talk about today, and we'll see Joseph handles it totally opposite way.
Yeah.
And he says, I can't do this.
Yeah.
So it's a neat comparison contrast between the two brothers.
Yeah. John?
I was going to say the same thing, but one thing in addition, if we see Joseph as the type of Jesus, it fits, especially if we see Judah as a type of us, Judah and his brothers. For instance, later in their life, Joseph redeems the brothers and he saves the brothers, including Judah, even when they're broken, like we are with Jesus.
I just always thought it was included because that this story is referenced in the genealogy of Jesus later, so it's kind of like explaining. It's one of those things in Matthew where they reference this story where you think, "Oh, why'd you have to bring up that part of the story? Why couldn't you have just said from this person?"
Yeah.
So this shows that there's all kinds of people used for God's purposes.
Yeah. Good. I think we're going to touch on all of those comments. There's one thing I need you to see before we get started. This is the most important thing about this class. In Genesis 37, the brothers hated, that's the word that's used in the text. That's not just me making it up. In verse 4, it says they hated him. They hated Joseph and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. His brothers hated him. And they said, let's throw him in a pit and kill him. But then they decided, no, here comes some Ishmaelite traders. Let's sell him into slavery instead. Who had that idea? In verse 36, then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, And let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. And then we'll just keep going. The Midianite traders passed by. They drew Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites. So that might be our first big clue that we were reading the story about how the brothers hated him and the brothers acted in this way. But then one brother is mentioned. Judah says, let's not kill him, let's sell him and send him down to Egypt. And then is it a coincidence that it is that one brother who's mentioned, who has this genius idea, who's going to have a story told about him in the very next chapter? And that's where we're like, oh, okay, that's probably not accidental. So let's do this. I'm going to throw this slide up here for you and show you. This is the first thing on the list. I think that Genesis 38 is this. It's the story of Judah getting what he deserves. Judah did this thing, and Genesis 38 is going to be God saying, now it's your turn. It's a story of, I don't know what to call it, punishment, like direct punishment. As we read through, keep your eyes open and look for this. Everything that Judah, the brothers, but especially Judah, everything that Judah did to Joseph is going to happen to him in this story. So watch for that. But also for Kevin's comment about God's plan and how God uses broken people, also watch for this. And it's a good lesson for us to learn. You can't stop God's plan. You can hate whoever you want to hate, and you can live however you want to live, but you're not going to stop God's plan. And that's maybe one of our big takeaways.
I see more in this light of that God's giving him an opportunity to live out his mistake, and not for the sake of necessarily punishing him, perhaps, but to bring it to his eyes to see, somewhat like Nathan did with David in that parable.
Yeah.
That's one of the challenges that I see that God places on different folks. For example, Gideon, and then conquering all those people as the most minuscule, and then going overboard when he's honored and has great riches, and then in a way leaves God later in his life.
Yeah, that's a really good way of saying it. I mean, I do think it sounds harsh, but I think the harsh version is true. God is getting Judah what he deserves. But yours is probably more carefully worded, and that is, he's living out the consequences of his actions. Okay, read it with me. I'm going to do the reading because I want you to look. I'm going to read verses 1 through 12, and I want you to look for, as we're reading, where are the opposites in this story to the Joseph story? It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. Then Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went in to her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Kezib when she bore him, and Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah my son grows up. for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. Okay, so what do you see in that 12 verses that is a specific contrast with Judah in the story with Joseph? I'll start. Go, Kevin.
Well, unlike, it kind of breaks the model of Mary outside of the family line, right? So you see Isaac and then Jacob, they're going back and like marrying into the family. He goes to a strange place, to a Canaanite person, and marries a wife, and then has children, and then he connects those children to Canaanite wives. So kind of breaking the pattern of
Yeah.
being with your people.
Yeah, we've seen this already in the book of Genesis. We've seen it multiple times. Let me throw out my main point here, and then we'll walk through the subpoints. My main point is that this is a story of family breakdown, which is what Judah and his brothers caused with the Joseph situation. Family breakdown, number one. Number one, there's just a language connection. In verse 1, it says, it happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers. Got that? Judah went down from his brothers. Look at 39 in verse 1. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt. There are tons of language connections in this story. And so in the same way that Judah was responsible for Joseph being taken down away from his brothers, now Judah himself goes down away from his brothers. Number 2 is the marriage situation, which if you've read from Genesis chapter 1 through this story, you've already seen a couple examples where this is not a good idea. This is a story of family breakdown. This is not God's plan. It's not what's supposed to be happening here. Number 3, Judah has 2 sons who die, which he gets to experience double of what he caused to his father. Do you remember Jacob's response in verse 33? Chapter 37 and verse 33. Oh no, an animal has killed Joseph. And Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And Judah and his brothers at least caused their dad to think that his son was dead, and he had to live with that. And now Judah gets to experience it twice. There's, in verse 7, was wicked in the sight of the Lord put him to death. Also, Onan in verse 10, he also put him to death. Number 4, you can interrupt me if you want. Number 4, I'm not sure that number 4 belongs on the list. Because number 4 is verse 11. Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah my son grows up, for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. This is Judah's daughter-in-law, and he sends her away, neglects his responsibility to her, neglects his promise to her, sends her off to live in her father's house away from him. And that, to me, is a part of the picture of family breakdown. Although, I'm not really sure how sad Judah would have been about it. But it's still on the list for me. And then number 5, this is the last thing on the list. His own wife died. In verse 12, in the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. every single thing that Judah caused, in this chapter, Judah got to experience himself. That's my first main takeaway from this. Thoughts on that? Or comments about any of that? Yep.
I just have a lot of spots where I've noted that all of this is the providence of God. Everything that is going on is because God is in control, and He ultimately will have the last say over everything that happens.
Yes. And so your point is my number 2 up there. You can't stop God's plan. It's not like they were trying to stop God's plan, but you might think so by their ridiculous lifestyles. But that's to Kevin's point. God is perfectly capable of taking the worst and the most broken people and molding it into something that works out for himself. Which is a great point from this story. Also, good news for me. Personally, for me. Yep.
I see it also magnifying the relationship of brothers, what they're to do in, well, what this is drawing back from is the Deuteronomy, was it 25? Yeah, Deuteronomy 25, where there's a brother dies to perpetuate the name of that brother in Israel so that that brother's name does not die out. And the goal was to perpetuate Israel in that sense. And so refusing to do this came with some consequences, and if you don't mind. If a man does not wish to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. And then the elders talk to him, and he says, I do not wish to take her. Then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in his face. And she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house shall be called in Israel the house of him who is called his him who had his sandal pulled off. So his entire identity and his household forever is perpetuated with shame.
Yeah. So basically, what Judah was trying to cause for his brother Joseph, not his neglected responsibility, he tried to cause it. He has a son, dead. He has another son, dead. He has another son, well, we'll read about that in a second, but it's like the same. They go together. It's not just some random story popped in the Joseph narrative. It goes there on purpose, is the point. Okay, next. Verses 13 and 14. Would somebody read that, please? And as you're reading for verses 13 and 14, you're looking for this. What is the connection to the Joseph story? So go ahead, read that, please.
When Tamar was told your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garment, covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance of Enon, which is on the road to Timnah, where she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given him in marriage.
See any connection? I'll give you some time, because this took a week's worth of sitting like this. I'm just thinking. I don't expect you to be able to, well, I do expect you to. It takes you less time than me, probably. This is a story. Yep.
I don't know if this is where you're going, but Joseph was sent to go find his brothers by the father, so he went to go find them, and then he does find them. But when the brothers saw him, they conspired against him. They didn't want to have anything to do with him. So there was a twist in the tale there. I don't know. Here she's sees an opportunity. She goes to check on her father-in-law. Basically, she's going to bring it up, and then there's a twist in the story there.
Yeah.
He
Go.
There's also something, I think, that's, I don't know, maybe coincidental, but it seems like garments play an intricate role in both of these stories. There's Joseph's amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and there's, here we're told that Tamar covers herself with a veil, wrapping herself up. So, again, maybe it's just happenstance or coincidence, but garments play an integral role.
Yeah, watch this. Click. Both stories have a connection of being deceived by clothes. And you might think, this is why, I think this class is a package deal. If I just tried to sell you any one of these single points by itself, you might say, that one's kind of a stretch. But when you put the whole thing together, you think there's too many connections for it to be accidental.
If you go to chapter 39 as well, Joseph's garment in Potiphar's wife's hands is what deceives Potiphar too.
Yes, there's connections forward and backward, which I think is really good.
Jacob and Esau.
What?
Jacob and Esau.
We'll see the Esau thing. That's the connection that's coming up. It is, because the two brothers and one comes out first and then doesn't come out. We'll see that at the very end. Hopefully. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time. Deception by clothes. Next. I'm going to read this just because it's longer and I don't want to ask someone to do it. I'm going to read verses 15 to 23. And in this section, I'm going to call this section just Judah and Tamar. Like, here is the section that is their interaction with one another. Verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me come into you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, What will you give me that you may come into me?" And he answered, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." And she said, "If you give me a pledge until you send it." And he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And she replied, "Your signet ring, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, "Where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim at the roadside?" And they said, "No cult prostitute has been here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." Also the men of the place said, "No cult prostitute has been here." And Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her." Connections. See any connections?
Sorry, I'm going off.
It's fun once you see it.
Joseph, yeah. I guess I'm seeing the tremendous payment and what would have been, just a goat, right? I mean, he's giving, like, what we would more or less say, our social security number, our credit card, our license, all the things that would identify us and prove that we are who we are. And instead of, $50, like a goat, what would that cost? He's got a whole flock of goats, who cares?
Yeah.
But, and then you've got Jacob and Esau, who he sells his birthright for a bowl, for a meal. Right?
Yeah. Let's do both of those in two pieces. First, let's just do the easy one. Verse 17, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." Quick connection. Verse 37, 31, "They took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood." It's just a connection. They deceived their father with the blood of a goat. Judah did this thing for the price of a goat, just a connection. But to your bigger point, how much this would have cost him, I think that if you look in verse 18, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet ring, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand. And then at the end of the story, oh, she wasn't there to give the goat, and Judah says, I just let her keep them. You might remember, though, in Genesis 49, when Jacob is making his last blessings and promises to his sons, in verse 10, this is the promise that Jacob is saying to Judah. It says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until tribute comes to him. Here's his birthright. This is his path. Yet he tries to give it away from a one-shot time with a prostitute. And there's multiple things in this, but this is why I have the second point up there. You can't stop God's plan. And to Cindy's point, I think, and I don't remember who else made the point. Kevin made the point, I think. God has this, he's got this roadmap for these people and what he intends for them to do. Against their will. They seem to be actively trying to not do what God wants them to do. Oh, hey, God's going to make me and my descendants this ruler, and the staff is not going to depart from me, and I'm going to try to give it away for a prostitute. There's just so many connections. It just keeps going on. And then you have the story of the pledge, the word pledge in verse 17. If you give me a pledge until you send it. Later when we get to chapter 43, we're not going to have time to do this today, probably. But when we get to chapter 43, I think this is a story of Judah learning and figuring it out. And he does, I think. Because when we get to chapter 43, and they say, we got to go back to Egypt to buy food, but we have to take Benjamin. And Jacob says, no way. Judah says, I will be a pledge for him. It's that same pledge conversation, but it's not, I'll give you a pledge so that I can have a time with a prostitute. It's, I will be the pledge for my brother. Not I'll sell my brother and get rid of him. I will stand in his place. It's just all that we're doing is making a list of connections.
I think the biggest point too, the identity piece, they took away Joseph's identity, they sold him, and Joseph completely loses his identity. Here Judah's like this.
Ooh, that's good,
this
identity.
away.
What else you got? Mark, you had one?
When Jacob finds out that Joseph is gone, he thinks he's dead. In verse 36 or 35, 36 of chapter 37, it says, all his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him. He refused comfort, but that's where the comfort was being given by his family. Here you have Judah, his sons are gone, and where he goes for comfort is Timnah with his friends. And not for the same type of comfort he would have gotten with his family.
Yes. And I think you already made this point, or maybe it was John who made this point. But the connection with Judah who says, oh, hey, look, a prostitute. I'll give away everything to have a prostitute. And the story you're going to talk about next Sunday where Potiphar's wife is constantly coming on to Joseph, but he's a man of integrity, and he says, no way, I will not do this thing. Contrast, connections.
Is there something about Judah and the cult prostitute? Is that like a tradition that they would do, passing through a land of a different god? Or, I mean, it's obviously different from what we have nowadays. But what was that relationship? Because I feel like there's a distancing away from God, and I don't know exactly the full scope of the cult prostitute in that, and I don't know if you studied that.
Yeah.
While investigating this.
I think it belongs in this next point. Oops, there's our connection with goats, prostitute, Joseph, Judah giving his staff away. Forgot about that. I think it belongs in this one. I think this is a story of gross hypocrisy. Not gross in the sense of ew, although that's true, but gross in the sense of a lot. And you see it right here in verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she's pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. And we read this story and we say, excuse me? You sold your brother, lied to your dad, slept with a prostitute. You're responsible for your kids being killed. Like, you go through the list here, and Judah sees this thing that Tamar did, and he says, burn her. And we're supposed to go, wait a minute. This is from the older, better brother who hated his younger brother for asserting himself. And what we're learning is there's no good actors in this story. Gross hypocrisy. That's red for me in my Bible. I want you to see verse 25. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet ring, cord, and staff. If you mark things in your Bible, the words please identify should be marked. Hakarna. Not like you need to know that, but that's what they are. Please identify. In 37:32, they sent a robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, we found this. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. More connections. Even like verbal, actual word connections between the different stories. And so here, verse 26, I finally have something marked in green. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I. This is the moment. Judah's been walking down this path, and everything he did was wrong, and he's just getting the constant fill of consequences for all of his actions until this spot. And at this spot, we have Judah say, maybe I need to stop this path. And if you wanted to have some practical application from this class, that might be it. How far are you going to walk down this life that you know is not right and is destructive before you finally say, maybe I should stop this. Maybe I should do something about this. I hope that if there's somebody here this morning who hears anything from this class, I hope it's not just the information. I think the information is amazing. I loved putting this class together. But if you have a takeaway, I hope that it's this. We read the story of Judah and we say, dude, what is wrong with you? Until he gets to the spot where he says, yeah, maybe I need to stop that. And that's what God is doing. That's what we're doing. We're taking a look at life and the decisions that you've made and the place where you are and the consequences that you're reaping, and we say, what are you doing? How long are you going to do this? Okay, last one, and then I'll stop. I think I'm going to stop because I have to, but I would like to stop for more conversation. 27-30. So let me tell you this before we read it. Do you remember they hated their brother because he was the younger one? How dare you, the younger one, assert yourself and think that we're gonna bow down to you? And then it happens to his family. This is the Jacob and like how humbling must that have been to be like, this is the right thing to do, and then it happens to your family, to your kids. So verse 27, when the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb, and when she was in labor, one put out a hand. The midwife took a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. This is the firstborn. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out with a scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Which we don't have time to do this, but Zerah means seed or descendant. So-and-so was the son of, and so-and-so was the son of Zerah. Descendant, seed, seed, seed. Zerah is supposed to be the descendant of Joseph. But instead, Perez comes out, and you might have a note that says Perez means breach. I'm breaking your system. So, I think we have to say this. If you're writing in your Bible, you need to note that Perez, the breach, I'm breaking your system, Perez becomes the descendant of David in Ruth chapter 4, at the very end of Ruth, and becomes the descendant of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 3. Jesus is born through, I'm breaking your system. I'll give you the last word. Again, I kind of apologize because this is supposed to be lessons from the life of Joseph. But moving through the Joseph narrative, I told Mark as we were dividing up the classes, I was like, please let me have that one. I really want that one. Because this is new for me. I've not seen this before, and I'm always excited about it. Anything you want to say to wrap it up? You know what you might be good at is not just to say observations, but what's going to be the thing that changes my life because of what I know now?
Because that's where I was thinking of, because of what I know now, this all looks like the old system's not the way, and this is the grace way, the faith way.
Yeah. You can try to mess up God's plan. You can try to sell your brother. You can try to give your birthright away. Point number 2, you can't. That's the message from this story. You can't mess up God's plan. He's working it, whether you like it or not. But point number 1, do you see now what I'm saying? I think this story is a story about how Judah got what he deserved. And he was convicted of it, thankfully. Yep.
Whenever I see such like clear parallel structure in stories, I always try to think like, how does this point me to Jesus, or what can I learn about Jesus? And I don't really know what this teaches me about Jesus, except like maybe instead of it being a type of Jesus, it's like full anti-type of like how far the nations and the people have gotten from God's plan, but still God is faithful and he always takes care of his people, even though his people are so far from him. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, my top 2, I think, is my connection with Jesus. We all get what we deserve. Except for, this is a story of God working a plan so that there's a way out. And you can plug Jesus right into that. Good. Anytime we can connect it to Jesus.
I think too, in that breakthrough, this is also the story of Judah kind of making a breakthrough, because we really see this is an inflection point in his life, where kind of the rest of the narrative about Judah is pretty strong.
Yes.
Very strong.
Judah's the one, sorry to interrupt, Judah's the one who causes Joseph to break down crying and saying, all right, guys, I'm your brother. Let's do this thing. He was the one who said, let's sell him. He was the one that we read about suffering, and he's the one who fixes it.
No, and I think so. It is also kind of like in us, and how do we recognize that brokenness in us and kind of also make that change. I think it's also, I mean, kind of flipping back to Sermon on the Mount too, it's as we think about the speck in somebody else's eye, how are we responding to that? Like, let's also kind of like, let's look in the mirror a little bit.
Yes, I wrote this down. The kids are here, so I'm going to stop. You can let them in. But I wrote down, in my Bible, I wrote down Matthew 7, judge not lest you be judged, next to burner. There's a whole lot of misuse of judge not lest you be judged. That is a perfect use of that. Excuse me? All right, we're done. You, hold on a second. The gremlins are at the door. You can say it if you want.
Just, the only thing I